And so at the time while I was at camp, I was texting my friend Becca. And I think because of that experience I had before where I kind of knew that she was a member of a church, I felt comfortable with sharing that, those feelings I was having. Like, hey, I feel like I need to go to church. I feel like I want to become a better person, that sort of stuff. And she just said, hey, do you want to come with me and my family to church on Sunday? And I was like, sure, why not?
All right. Hello, Saints Unscripted, everybody. We are back today, and I am here with our friend Jon Trout. We've got an awesome conversion story that we're going to be talking about today. He's got just a great story to share. So, Jon, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's just hear a little bit about you, what you're up to now, where you're at in life.
So I am currently at medical school here in San Antonio, Texas. I'm in my third year, so just going through medical school, going through the whole journey of medicine right now. That's my main thing right now.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's why we're doing this on Zoom, because he's in Texas and I'm in Utah. And you're married, correct?
That's right. So, I couldn't forget to describe. So I have my wonderful wife, Sarah. We have 2 kids. My son's 4 and my daughter's 2.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, great. How did this all start when you were growing up?
Yeah, great question. So for me, just for a little bit of context, so I grew up in a family that wasn't super religious. I kind of grew up until about the age of 8 or 9. I was going to a Methodist church with my mom, and I think my grandma would come when she could. Mm-hmm. And so I have memories of going and kind of participating in a variety of different things. But kind of after that point, I think it was kind of challenging. I grew up in a family where it was my parents and my twin brother and I. And so it was challenging for my mom being kind of the main one to get us to go to church. I think it was hard for her as we got older. We were really rambunctious, just really challenging probably to bring on her own.
Right. As kids can be.
So as time went on, didn't really go to church very much. And so I would kind of go to church with some friends occasionally. And at times I would have these moments where I think sometimes at the end of the year, I'd think, oh man, I should be a little bit more spiritual. I would even, at times, my grandma, when I was born, gave me a little Bible. And I would go and grab it and I would start reading, from the first page of Genesis. After a page or two, I would get bored and put it back down because I just didn't really understand anything. And so growing up, I didn't really have much of an understanding of who God was, who Jesus Christ was. But like I said, I would have these moments where I felt a little bit more spiritual and felt like I should be, but I just didn't really know how to do that.
Gotcha.
But so what really kind of picked up for me was in 9th grade, I became friends with a girl at my school named Becca. And she, at the time, I don't think she was very comfortable with talking about the church. But one day while we were in like an elective period during 9th grade, her and a friend of ours and I, we were just in the art room doing some random stuff. And her friend named Emma turned to me and was like, hey, do you know that Becca's a Mormon? I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't know. She, like I said, I don't think she was very comfortable talking about it at the time. And then that was kind of the rest of that conversation. She didn't say anything else about it. Mm-hmm. But I found myself just really, like, after school, I just found myself just thinking about it. I think if she had said, oh, she's like Christian, otherwise Christian or Baptist or something, it wouldn't have stuck with me. But I just kept thinking, like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that she's a, Mormon? And so I even went, again, it's very uncharacteristic of me. Like, I went online, found Mormon.org, thankfully. And so I just kind of looked up a little bit about it. And even I just called her out of the blue and just asked her, like, hey, what does this mean? Like, are you really a Mormon?
Wow, you just called her. That's pretty gutsy. That's awesome.
And so she and her older sister, they kind of explained to me a little bit about, because the only idea I had about Mormons at the time was polygamy. in an 8th grade textbook that I had, they just talked about, Mormons practice polygamy, that they went out to Mexico. Didn't even say it was Utah. Now it just said it was Mexico.
Oh, interesting. Kind of some history there.
Right. And so they explained to me what it was, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. And so it wasn't for another couple months that really the church came up. That was really the only experience I had. I think for me, that was kind of the first moment where, again, not at the moment, but in retrospect, I can see that the Spirit was trying to tell me, like, hey, there's a little bit more to this. So at the time I was in scouting. Even before joining the church, I was in Boy Scouts. And so I decided that summer that I would work at a scout camp. And while I was there, I was going to be doing a jamboree later in the year. And so I had to miss some of my time where I would normally be working to participate in some activities related to that. And when I came back to camp, I was like, okay, I'm going to tent with these 2 friends that I know. I've worked with them before. It'd be great. And they told me that the camp director is like, no, you actually can't tent with them. You have to tent with some other people. And I was like, well, that's just kind of weird. Like, why is that? And again, this is one of those moments where in retrospect, I can see, okay, there was like the Lord was preparing a way for me, kind of what I needed to get to the church eventually. And so when I was with these 2 guys that, again, I didn't know them, one of their names was Casey and the other guy was Nate. And I walked into the tent one night and they were having this religious discussion. I found out Casey was an atheist and Nate was a Christian. And again, from my context, I didn't really have a lot of religious background. I didn't know who God was or anything like that. So I just kind of sat up on my cot, just listened to their conversation. And when I was listening to them, Casey, and this is not me saying anything negative about atheists. This is just this one experience. But he turned to Nate and said, the Bible's a book of lies. Like, he was just telling him that, like, the Bible is terrible and it was not a good thing. And again, for someone like me, where I didn't really have any strong feelings one way or the other about spiritual things or about the Bible, it really, really bothered me when he said that. And I started really thinking about, where's my life going? Like, it honestly got to the point where as I was contemplating this, I was worried that I would eventually become like him. I was worried that I would criticize people of faith or be just kind of belittling of people of faith.
And how old were you at this time?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So I was just 15 when this happened.
Wow. Honestly, for a 15-year-old, I feel like having such mature thoughts as that, from overhearing this conversation, I feel like most 15-year-olds just wouldn't even care, I just think that shows a lot of maturity on your end, but that's interesting.
Yeah. And so from that point, I just was starting to contemplate, what are different things that I need to do to just become a better person. And oftentimes I was thinking about I feel like I should go to church. I feel like that would be something that would be important for me to do. And this time it felt different compared to all the other times where I kind of was like, oh, I should go, but it never really happened. But yeah, I was just wondering, where should I go? Because I know some churches I've been to before, but didn't really know anyone that well. And so at the time while I was at camp, I was texting my friend Becca. And I think because of that experience I had before where I kind of knew that she was a member of a church, I felt comfortable with sharing that, those feelings I was having. Like, hey, I feel like I need to go to church. I feel like I want to become a better person, that sort of stuff. And she just said, hey, do you want to come with me and my family to church on Sunday? And I was like, sure, why not?
Oh, what a good friend. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's interesting to note too is that even before going to church, that whole week for me was really pretty significant. Boy Scouts encourages, religious activity of being spiritual, and they had a non-denominational chapel session that week. And normally for me, I would just be like, no, I'm not going. I wouldn't even want to participate. But it was actually a very spiritual experience for me that time where I felt like, okay, something's good about this, you know, in general. Like it felt like I was starting to kind of go in the right direction. But I think especially when I eventually went to church that first Sunday, where her and her family picked me up for church, and it's really hard to explain how it felt being there. But compared to all the other churches I had ever been in, and you know, even in that chapel session I went to that week, um, I just could feel that there was something very distinct and different about the church. I think in some ways it was just like a feeling of peace I had never felt before. Um, and also just, I think also the feeling of, you know, people were like sincerely, like seemed to care about me, like really interested in who I was. Um, and so from that first Sunday, it just was a very life-changing experience for me. Interestingly enough, I didn't meet the missionaries that first Sunday. It wasn't until the following Sunday that I met them. But during that week, I just was constantly thinking about, you know, the things that we talked about in our, you know, our lessons and sacrament meeting. And later on, even when I made a journal of what all the things I was going through, I even noted that, you know, that week I didn't want to go to chapel because I just wanted to go to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like I didn't want to go to any other church.
Wow.
After.
You just knew from that point on.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
And so for me, it was just, yeah, the beginning of a wonderful, wonderful experience.
And so how long from when you went to that first church until when you became baptized, like, was that pretty quick, or did you kind of talk to the missionaries for a while? How did that go?
Yeah. So for me, from the first time I went to church until I was baptized, it was about a month and a half. And so I got to meet the missionaries that second Sunday I went to church, and they just kind of came up to me after church. I had no like preconceived notions about the missionaries whatsoever. I didn't know, again, much about the church at all. And so they came out to me and was like, "Hey, can we like teach you a lesson sometime?" I was like, "Sure, let me just, you know, ask my parents." And thankfully my parents were okay with it. And so we went over to my friend's house with her family. We had dinner, and then they taught me about the restoration of the gospel. And I think for me, it's so fascinating because when I was there, well, I guess another point to point out, that second Sunday was a fast and testimony Sunday. And I know a lot of people in the church kind of have like mixed feelings.
About taking some, like an investigator on testimony. It's like, oh, what are people going to say? Yeah.
Right. But the interesting thing in my experience was I actually walked away from that Sunday asking myself, like, do I have a testimony? I was really wanting to know, like, hey, like, what is a testimony and do I have one? So it's actually a really powerful experience for me. And so then going into that missionary lesson, they taught me, you know, that I could read the Book of Mormon and pray about it and know for myself. And that was something that really impressed me, that, you know, these two guys who were, you know, a little bit older than me at the time, right? And they're just telling me like, hey, you don't have to just believe what we're telling you. You could actually find out for yourself. And it's kind of funny looking back too, because the missionaries later on told me that after that first lesson, they're like, I don't know like what he's gonna do, because I'm a really pretty quiet guy, especially back then. I didn't ask any questions. I was just listening and just really like listening, absorbing everything that they were teaching me. But they walked in, it's like, we don't know if he's gonna do anything with this.
They're like they don't know if they're getting that feedback, right? Like,
right.
Is he interested? Yeah.
Right. But during that first week and again, I was at camp, so I would go to church on the weekends and meet with the missionaries over the weekend, but then I would be at camp all week. And during that first week, I really took their invitation to heart. For me, the biggest questions for me were like, how am I going to know if I have faith in Jesus Christ? Because in Moroni 9:10, it talks about, you know, you have to have faith in Jesus Christ as kind of a prerequisite to receiving an answer. And so I was just like, how am I going to know that? Because I don't know if I do. But ultimately, as I was reading the Book of Mormon and praying, I ended up having a dream that week, and that was my witness that the Book of Mormon was true. And I kind of confirmed that because of that dream that, oh, hey, I do have faith in Jesus Christ because I got an answer.
Wow.
And so for me, it was interesting then going back to church the following week, and, the missionaries asked me like, oh, how did it go? And so I was able to tell them that I read 170 pages of the Book of Mormon
Nice.
in that week. And I got an answer. So it was just, again, the beginning of a wonderful trajectory for me.
That's incredible. So when you kind of talked to us before recording, you mentioned that you had a pretty cool experience about wanting to serve a mission, but this happened before you were baptized. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So again, I had, this experience after that first week, and, the missionaries were teaching me every week. I kept reading the Book of Mormon, and then it was after a couple of weeks when they taught me about the gospel of Jesus Christ that they invited me to be baptized, and I definitely said yes. Ironically, at the time, again, this is very much my personality, where I was reading the Book of Mormon a bunch, and so it talks about baptism all the time. And I remember kind of thinking, like, around the time they invited me, I was like, oh, I probably should be baptized, but it might be kind of weird to ask to be baptized.
Oh my gosh, I bet that's so exciting for them. They're like, what? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was about, I want to say about a week or so after they invited me to be baptized, and they taught me another lesson. Then one of the missionaries, and again, my missionaries were wonderful. It was Elder Thompson, Elder Blackburn, and they were amazing. In this particular instance, Elder Thompson, I think it was after a lesson, he kind of just gave me a shoulder elbow bump, and was like, you should think about serving a mission. And I was just thinking, again, 15, just being introduced to the church, was like, that sounds like a great idea, but like 2 years is a long time. It's a big commitment.
Yeah.
And so, initially my response was like, I don't know about that. But so it was that week where I went on that jamboree I was referring to, for the National Jamboree. And it gave me a lot of time to just really reflect and ponder on that invitation that he gave me. And while I was there, I remember I got to meet Brother Beck, who was the Joan Young Men's president at the time. I even got to hear Elder Hales speak in sacrament meeting there. So I got to hear from an apostle as well, which was really, really great. But as I was there, I remember contemplating, I think one of the things they may have even taught was about how you could just bless thousands of people through your missionary service. And that was something that just kind of blew my mind, that, through doing that active service for 2 years, I could possibly bless the lives of thousands of people. And so I was praying and kind of contemplating and pondering on that. That's where my answer came. Was I felt like, if that's something that would be able to bless so many people, why shouldn't I do it? And so that was kind of another instance where I was able to, I called up the missionaries, like, hey, like, I got my answer. I need to go serve a mission.
Did that scare you at all? Were you nervous, or were you just like, okay, we're just going to go?
Yeah, I think at that point it didn't. I think for my parents, it definitely was, though.
For sure.
Because as you can imagine, again, this is like, I'm 15. I imagine being my parents were like, all of a sudden your son just starts attending a church so you don't really know much about, probably have heard some kind of weird things about. I definitely know my extended family had. And so I think for them, it was, they were just super supportive the whole time.
That's awesome.
And they were always supportive all the way up through, going on my mission and everything. They were always supportive. I'm really grateful for them.
That's awesome. And good for them, that, because even for a parent who has had years and years to prepare for their kid going on a mission, like, even for any parent, that's a big sacrifice.
Yeah.
So that's awesome that they would do that. So you had this incredible conversion story that happened, honestly, pretty quickly. It was quick and it was powerful. And it's been a few years since then. It's been 13 years or so. And I can't help but think about what you said, when you were 15 and you overheard that conversation and you wanted to be someone who could, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but who could just support people in their beliefs and be someone who, I don't know, like you wanted to make a change in your life. So looking back at how far you've come, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think for me, again, at the time, I would say I was a pretty good guy. Like there was nothing really that terrible I was doing. But I think, in the church, we kind of talk about how, the gospel makes bad men good and good men better, or that sort of sentiment. Um, I really felt like my experience with my conversion, and since then for sure, it's kind of in that process of just becoming better. Um, like for example, for me with reading the Book of Mormon, honestly, I didn't understand a lot when I read the first time through.
Oh, probably
There's
not.
lots of references that I didn't know about, in the Old Testament, the or not the New Testament, primarily the Old Testament, right? Um, but there were specific scriptures that often I would read, and I was like, wow, like the Spirit will help me understand that's how I'm feeling, or that's what I'm going through. And one of them was in Mosiah 5, where King Benjamin was talking to his people, and then asked them if they believed, and they said that they believed and that they experienced a change in their hearts, where they had no more disposition to do evil, but to do good continually. And so as I read that, and as I was going through, the rest of my conversion experience, that's what I felt was that huge change. I think even the missionaries, when as they were teaching me, they saw that too. Where kind of like, I don't know, I was really initially kind of really frustrated and annoyed that I was working at Scout Camp. I signed up for it, but I was kind of
Like,
annoyed
why did I
that
do
I
this?
had just did it. I was kind of not had a great outlook on it. But as I was being taught by the missionaries and reading the Book of Mormon, and I just felt like, what, actually everything's going to be okay. Um, and so, and since then too, I think I've found that that experience I had, with Casey and Nate, where, that his statement kind of provoked all this, questioning of like who I wanted to be. I think that's just, for me, that's the kind of person I still strive to be, is someone who is, willing to listen, not criticize people for what they believe. And so the gospel does that to people. I can say it's done that to me.
Thank you so much. It's so true. You don't have to, like it. Right when you're starting out and learning about the gospel, obviously you don't know everything, but it's just amazing how powerful the Spirit can be and how that can have a change on your heart. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And one other thing, do you have any advice for anyone who might be investigating the church right now or is at maybe a similar point in their conversion journey?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I've been asked a lot by people who are kind of investigating the church or have recently joined or plan to join is kind of how I navigated situations where like family members were kind of, or friends were not really supportive or kind of had different thoughts about the church, and you're trying to help them to understand. Because in my situation, like I said, my parents were always really supportive. I did have some extended family members and I love them. But at the time they were not very supportive. Like I think that's just some very incorrect ideas about what the church was. And frankly, if you have a member of your family who's going to join a church that you think is not great, you're probably gonna have feelings about it, right?
Right.
But one of the things that I've noticed, again, for me, it's been like 13 years since I joined. I think what's important to remember is that even if people right now do not, don't really support you, still kind of like, even though you're telling them like, hey, it's not actually this way, but they kind of still believe it's, a certain way, whatever that they're saying is. It's important to remember that people will be able to see the fruits of the gospel in your life. And I think that's what happened for me, where, my extended family, I think, again, they had certain thoughts about what it meant to be a member of the church and what the church was. But I need to be able to see all the good fruits the gospel's brought into my life, that I wanted to become just a much better person. I went and served a mission for 2 years, which, it takes a lot to get a young person to want to leave their home for 2 years
It
and
does.
share a message about the gospel, right? And so I think just kind of having that perspective that, even if right now it's kind of hard and people can't see the good, as you continue to live the gospel and you make those changes in your life, people are going to notice that. And if they truly love you, they're going to be supportive, even if they don't always agree with you. I guess also as well, just kind of know that, life in the church can be hard. And, in my experience, I was the only member of the church who joined my family and still am. But just kind of know that, at times it might feel lonely, it might be hard, but just know that the Lord's always there. And He's always there to support you. And know that there are people around you in your ward, elsewhere, that are there cheering you on. I think for me, that was the thing that helped me the most at times, was just knowing that I had people on my board that loved and cared about me and supported me. So I would say those are some of the things that I think would be really important for people.
I think that is very solid and very well said advice. You're never alone in this. There's always a community and there's always God there for you. So, and I love what you said about the fruits. Help people see how the gospel is changing you for the better. I love that so much. Thank you, Jon. I think that is a beautiful story. And thank you so much for coming on and for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, if you guys have any questions for Jon, let us know in the comments. And let us know any stories that you have. If you had any similar stories to him, or are continuing to experience this change in your heart as the gospel does with us. But thank you again, Jon, for coming on, and thank you all for watching. So we hope you all have a great day. And I'm super awkward when I end these. I never know how to do it.